Hi, I hope you all are having a good start to the week. So, I just wanted to come on and do hopefully a fairly quick video. Let's see how much I ramble. But I know people have asked to talk about boundaries in this space. And so, my hope was that I would do a video and literally just talk about my personal thoughts and feelings around boundaries, suggestions, or things that have worked for me in the past. And then maybe tomorrow, when we have our group check in, we can use that as a time to continue the conversation. And so, by no means, which I think I've said in every video before, I'm not an expert on boundaries, self care. I'm not a therapist. I am literally just a human being walking this out like the rest of us. But boundaries are important to me, and I think the older I get, the better I am getting about setting boundaries. And so I think it's just helpful for me to talk about it, and it's hopefully helpful for you to be in a space where we can kind of vibe off of each other and talk about what boundaries mean for us. And so I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this because I was like, what do I want to say when it comes to boundaries, or what does it mean to me? But at our last check-in, I sort of looked up the definition of boundaries. For me, when there's anything that's sort of important life-wise, I always like look up a definition, because the literal definition is how I usually start processing something, and then I honestly will journal about the literal definition of something. And so I will just give you the definition that I looked up about boundaries, which is a sphere of activity. And so I know that that is not like the therapist definition of boundaries, but to me, it's like a super simple definition that is really helpful in terms of like navigating how I think about boundaries. And so for me, a boundary is literally, when it comes to my activity, when it comes to my mental energy, my physical energy, my emotional energy, where do I want to place my activity? Like, how much energy do I have for a particular given thing or person? And so I don't know. I feel like that's what is like a helpful definition for me, and a way for the rest of us to think about it. And so I know when we talk, people brought up like family boundaries. I'm sure people are thinking about like work boundaries. But in general, I think when it comes to setting boundaries, first you have to start and say, like, what area of life do you want to set better boundaries or have better boundaries? I know we can get like super general and say, like, I just want to have better boundaries. But if we be honest, there are some areas of life that we're better at setting a boundary than we might be at other areas of life. So, like, some of y'all are really good to maybe tell somebody, okay, by 10 p.m., I'm shutting it down because I need to go to bed, or I need to put the kids to sleep. And so I don't take phone calls after 9 or 10 p.m. And when it comes to maybe prioritizing your immediate family, you are better about setting boundaries. For some people, it might be around, places that they'll go or activities that they'll engage in. So they might be like, I'm not going to go to X club, or I'm not going to go to Y setting because that doesn't feel good for me. And so I think, one, first acknowledge the areas where you feel good about boundaries and where you feel like you have set boundaries, and to use that area as an example of the other area where you would like to set better boundaries. And so for me, I know I could do a better job at work boundaries, but I honestly feel quite good about some of the things I set up in terms of my work schedule, or in terms of being able to sort of leave work in a particular space, like leave it at work and then come home and just be at home. So, like, the way that I treat my home, I feel pretty good about that boundary. Like, I don't just allow anybody to come up in my space. I make sure that the space feels good for me. And again, it goes back to my sphere of activity. So I guess my first tip would be, identify where you want to set your boundary, or what area. Then the next would sort of be, again, find an example of an area of life where you have set boundaries before, and sort of use that as maybe a guiding point. And so for me, I feel like boundaries shift and change. Like, when I think about it as a form of like this is a sphere of activity. Activity can like increase or it can decrease. So when it comes to boundaries, for me, you can set clear boundaries and you can understand that boundaries can shift. So I guess that would be like my third personal tip, is understanding that boundaries can change and they can shift. And so I might set a particular boundary with somebody in 2018, and now that we're in 2020 and I feel like I can trust them more, or I feel like, I am in a place of healing or maturity, I might be able to engage with that person in a different way, or vice versa. One of the things that I have realized for me over the past couple years is I cannot listen to someone who just dumps, like, particularly when it comes to my close friendships and relationships. I had a different kind of energy for that in 2016 and 2017. Once we got to like part of 2018, 19, 20, if I feel like that relationship is someone who's constantly just talking about themselves and just kind of talking about like what they're going through, then I have to give that person more limited airtime because I just don't have the mental capacity for it. Like, work is busier. I was managing work and, finishing up school stuff. And so I just couldn't do it. And so I think understanding that boundaries can be seasonal and they also can be relational, and that they can change based off of what your value system is and what your capacity is. Which I know might sound vague, but I think those are ways to like sort of like put metrics or put standards around like what your boundaries are. I know a few people had talked about like family and family boundaries. So I'll use myself for an example. Me and my mom have a really good relationship. I love, 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 love my mother to death, but she is a talker. She is retired. She doesn't work anymore. And all I do is, Monday through Friday for at least 40 hours, all I'm doing is working and talking to people, being in the social work field. And so my mom will call me multiple times a day, or she will text me multiple times a day. And what I've had to learn is that I actually don't have the energy to receive all of those texts or all of those calls, even though I love her. And I think culturally, particularly I think in Black community and communities of color, when you don't engage with family in a certain way, it almost seems as if you're being disrespectful or that you don't care. And you might know that that's not the case, but that might not translate well to other people. So one of the things I've had to learn through therapy, through prayer, through patience, is having ways to communicate with my mom my personal boundaries. And so first, having to identify that something about the way that we communicate doesn't feel good for me. Something about the frequency of how we communicate doesn't give me a lot of energy. Like, I found that I could talk to my mom for 30 minutes or 45 minutes on the weekends, where maybe I have a little bit more capacity, I have more freedom in my day. I can kind of hear if she needs to vent and like be okay with listening to that, versus doing that at 7 p.m. on a Tuesday night or Wednesday after a tough day at work. And so I had to sort of gauge for myself where my energy and where my capacity was, and then find a way to communicate that with my mom and say, hey, we can text and you can, text me good night and tell me that you love me and I'll text you back, but you might not get a phone call until we get to the weekend. And so I've sort of learned or sort of developed a style with my mom where I'll text her early in the week and say, hey mom, it's a really busy week. If you don't hear from me, I'm safe. I'm okay. I love you. We'll connect later in the week. Or, I'll just have a different space, mom, to be able to kind of hear what you want to talk about once we kind of move later in the week. But please don't be offended if my communication is more limited because of X, Y, and Z. And so I don't think you always have to explain yourself when it comes to a boundary, but when it comes to people that you love and care about, I think it can be positive. One of the things that, because I took a couple notes to think about what I could share, is I was watching this video, which I think I'll post, and it's literally only 9 minutes, from a young woman about boundaries. And one of the things that she says is when you are establishing boundaries, you can do that, she said, from a place of grace and gratitude. So for instance, maybe you're someone who's asked to speak on a lot of panels, or maybe you're someone who you're really productive at work and people always want to include you in something. Or maybe you're someone who your family leans on because they trust your insight and they trust your wisdom. That's not a bad thing, but you're tired and you might be tapped out. And so you can acknowledge that there might be care or a desire for them to be connected to you, and also say that it's something that you can't participate in. So one of the things she put in the video was maybe just use no thank you. Sorry, mom, I love you, but not able to participate in this family gathering. Or, yep, no thank you, I won't be able to come to this event. And so thank you, particularly if you're someone who maybe struggles with the word no, or you struggle with letting people down and you're someone who maybe is more empathetic, or you're someone who can kind of be a people pleaser or have those perfectionist tendencies, starting with a no thank you may be a way to gradually build you to just a straight no. For me, one of the things that a therapist that I had told me to do was to say, let me think about it. So when I was asked to do things at work, or when I was asked to do things from friends or family, instead of immediately saying yes because I felt the pressure to, I would say, actually, can I think about that? Or say, let me think about that, or I'll get back to you in a couple of days, or let me get back to you in about a half an hour, but I need to sit with that. So using language that practices the pause. So I think that's another tip, is handling it with grace and gratitude. So you don't have to be a jerk when you tell people no, or that you're not going to participate in something, but also allowing yourself to pause. If it is harder for you to just straight up say no, you don't have to go, 0 to 100. You can start at 50. And so maybe the no thank you, or the let me think about it, or, let me sit with it, gives you an opportunity to at least think about it. Like what I would do at work is I would jump to say yes, knowing that my schedule was really busy, or I would jump to say that I could do something and not actually knowing if I have the capacity to do it. So before you jump to the no, or before you jump to the yes, sitting with yourself. Like, I think it goes back to all of the things that we've talked about as a group anyway, when it comes to mindfulness is literally taking a pause to just be present with yourself. And so boundaries are a form of mindfulness. It's taking a second to be present with yourself. And so a thing that has really helped me and allowed me to process or to establish better boundaries with people is to say, let me think about it. And then I can take my 2 minutes, my 20 minutes, or my 2 days, and I can say, okay, Sharonda, do you really want to do this? Do you really want to be a part of this? Do you really want to have that conversation? And if the answer is no, then I've found a little bit of time, or maybe even some language in practicing that, like, pause to communicate that I am unable or I'm unwilling to do something. The other thing that I would suggest to people is, when it comes to a boundary, you might actually not just be helping yourself, but you might be helping someone else when you establish a better boundary. I know for me, particularly when I was younger, I used to feel the pressure to answer every phone call from every friend and be there for every breakup, be there for every job loss, be there for every family issue, particularly for people who would maybe reach out to me a lot. And I found that if there was a day where I went to sleep or I just did not feel like doing it, they still found a way to get the support that they needed. They found another person to talk to. They found time to spend time with themselves or to pray and to come up with their own solution. Boundaries also equal humility, which is another thing that I'll kind of throw out there. I think sometimes we don't establish boundaries because we don't always feel comfortable with being vulnerable and humble enough to say, I cannot do this, I don't have the capacity to do this, or this doesn't feel good for me. I don't have the energy for it. And I think we sometimes plow through because we don't want to think that we're vulnerable. We don't want to be seen as weak. We don't want to really come to the realization that we can't be all things to all people and we can't do everything. And so approach setting boundaries with a level of humility, not just in how you communicate with people, but really the understanding of who you are and what you do or don't have to give. When I realized that I wasn't people's personal savior, it made me feel better. I found that when I honored myself and didn't always pick up the phone or wasn't the person to be there and listen to the conversation, that person might call me and say, yeah, you know what, Sharonda, I actually ended up spending time journaling or going for a walk and I felt much better. Sometimes when we don't set boundaries, we are actually, blocking other people's ability to be mindful for themselves or other people's ability to find a different resource that they need. And we don't want to do that. And so for me, it's also helpful to understand that sometimes when I set a boundary or I move myself out of the way, it actually allows space for somebody else to come up with their own resource, their own solution, or bring the right person into their path. We're not meant for everything. We're not meant to be a part of everybody's journey. We're not meant to be in every space at every time. We're not meant to be at every table. I firmly believe that we're supposed to be in certain places and not in others. And so just having the ability to understand that, if I set a boundary at work, they may find someone who actually needs the experience to learn and grow and work on this particular project. If I do set a boundary with my mama, maybe she'll just call one of my other siblings and they'll have a better conversation and grow in their relationship. If I set a boundary with that friend who's always coming to me, maybe they'll understand that therapy is a helpful route for them, or journaling is an option for them, or maybe they'll connect with somebody else. But you don't have to be a part of everything, and everybody's story and every situation literally is not for you. And so understanding that for myself has also been helpful when it comes to establishing boundaries. Sorry, I had to get the cough out. I'm gonna get some water too, y'all, because we're friends and I could do that. So the other thing that has been helpful for me to understand is boundaries don't always have to be explained. I am an over-explainer. If you know me, you probably know that already. There's a lot of times where I will maybe want to justify because I feel insecure, honestly, or I feel bad, like I don't want to inconvenience anyone or I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. But, it's nice to sort of share and, turn something or someone down, with gratitude and grace, like we just talked about. But sometimes you don't have to. Like sometimes that's also a boundary, is that you just don't have the time or the energy to explain. And you shouldn't have to justify yourself. So I know that kind of goes to the flip side of what we just talked about. But again, if you don't want to do something and you feel just like saying no, you can say, no, I actually am not going to participate in that. Or no, I'm actually not going to be available for that. Or no, I won't be able to show up to that family function. Or no, I won't be able to participate on this phone call. No is a full sentence. The thing about the word no is it's the same word in so many different languages. And I think that's because it's powerful. Like no is full within itself, and it's not negative. It's just factual and it's definitive. And so for me, sometimes just saying I don't have it or I don't want to, that doesn't make me feel comfortable. Like just being really kind of straight and to the point helps save you energy. It helps reduce stress. It helps you not have to go through the turmoil of thinking about how eloquent you have to sound when you are saying something. But literally, you can just say no. Sarah Jakes Roberts, who is a speaker, preacher, really big on women's empowerment. Some of her videos are in the resource link. She talks a lot about friendships and relationships. And she's like, honestly, you don't have to make an announcement to every friend that you've decided to have distance from them. Or if you feel like you've maybe outgrown certain friendships or certain people in your life are not the most positive, live your life and do what you need to do. And when the time comes for you to interact with them, you just being your authentic self will already set up a boundary. But you don't have to make an announcement to every person and say, hey, I'm setting boundaries, so don't call me after 7. Or, hey, I'm setting boundaries, so I'm not going to any more family events until 2025. You don't always have to do that. It may actually save you some time, some energy, some peace of mind, and may be helpful to other people if you're not out here always making boundary announcements. Like, it really is okay to naturally and authentically live in the way that feels good for you, and then other people will see those boundaries. You don't have to always explain them, and you don't need to. And so just taking that as a nugget, that like no is a full and complete sentence in itself, and that you don't have to explain to people every time you set a boundary. They will see the way that you live and the way that you speak and the way that you move, and they will fall in line or they won't. But at the end of the day, you don't have to waste energy justifying decisions that you make that feel good for you. The other piece, which I feel like I've talked about maybe in this video, is still to write it down. Like, I'm a very sort of word processy person, and you might not be a writer, you might not be someone who journals a lot. For me, it's really helpful, but I think taking what is in our brain and putting it on paper always helps make something a reality. When you have a busy day, you don't just keep it all in your brain. You make a schedule, you make notes, and then you write it down. When it comes to boundaries, write it down, journal about it, find ways to process. Maybe even just like record yourself like on your phone, or like take down notes on your phone. But finding ways to kind of process and think through what it is that feels good for you and doesn't, and seeing it on paper is another way to also help you process, but help you be held accountable. So for me, I know that if I schedule that I'm going to be off work in advance versus just thinking, oh, I need to take a day off, it's much more likely going to happen if it's already in the schedule. And it's the same thing when it comes to not just work boundaries, but other boundaries. If you have a space where you can write and journal and get your feelings down, it allows you to be held accountable to where you might be in a situation where you want to like stray from the boundary and know that you don't need to. And so even having a text message that says, I will leave work at 5 p.m. today, that you send to yourself. Once it gets to 4:45, it's harder to ignore that you have 15 minutes to leave work once you look at the text message that you sent yourself, or the alarm that you put on your phone that says you got 15 minutes to get out of work. But finding a way to process and to like actually sort of outline some of your boundaries, for me, is helpful. And it's another way to kind of process. Another podcast that's also in the resources is from Therapy for Black Girls, and the episode is called A Full Body Yes. It's probably one of my favorite like Therapy for Black Girls episodes. And so they have a woman on there who does sound bathing, and for those of you who don't know who that is, I'm not going to explain it very well, but essentially it's using various bowls and materials to like make sounds that align with like vibrations. And so you might see it a lot in like yoga practices or other things. But this woman was like a former chiropractor and talked about how like the full body yes helps you learn a lot about yourself. So if you can't give a full yes to something, then maybe it's a no. Which for me, I tend to be like always like the in between, but I just never thought about it that way. So one thing that she said is like when kids don't like something, when they don't want to do something, when something feels unsafe, you can see it in their whole body, and they listen instinctually to their body. Like if they don't want to be there, if they don't like it, you're going to see it all on their face. And they're just gonna know, but they listen to their body and then they respond accordingly. As adults, we've been conditioned to not do that. So, because of things we may have gone through in our past, physically, emotionally, mentally, we've kind of been taught to not listen to what our body tells us. And so one of my tips is, what does your body say when it comes to setting that particular boundary? Is your body saying, we don't want to do that? We don't want to physically engage with that person. Either we don't like their energy, or, if this feels unsafe. How often are you actually listening to what your body is saying and then using that to help guide the boundaries that you set? For me, when I move a little bit slower, or I give myself time to think and I listen to, is there tension in my shoulders? Is my stomach starting to get upset? Do I feel like, for me, as someone who identifies as Christian, do I feel like the Holy Spirit, like, is kind of telling me, like, that don't feel good, girl? Like, whenever I start getting that uncertainty, when I lean into that and, like, kind of explore what that feels like for me, I usually get clarity about a decision that I'm trying to make, or about if I should participate in something or not. And so for all of us, I think at the end of the day, our bodies have been with us our entire lives, and they're going to be pretty honest with us. So when you're about to go to that family event, when you're about to walk into this particular situation or engage with this person or watch this thing on TV, does it feel good to your body? Like, does your head hurt? Does your stomach churn? Or do you feel more relaxed? And even if you don't feel like super excited about it, do you feel at peace? Like, does your body feel like, okay, this might be a hard decision, but this is the right decision? And so I would encourage myself and all of us to think about the full body yes when it comes to boundaries. Like, is this something that my mind and my body are co-signing on? Like, is this something that we want to be a part of? Again, thinking about boundaries as a sphere of activity. Do we want to be in that activity? Yes. No. But if you start to feel that, to sit with that, to honor that, and to be more open to it, is definitely a suggestion that I have for folks. The other thing that I think is helpful to think about is, like, why are you setting up the boundary? And not why to justify for other people or to explain to other people, but like, why are you setting up this particular boundary? Like, if you know that this person doesn't make you feel physically safe, that might be pretty self-explanatory. You just don't mess with them, or that going into this environment, you don't make the best decisions, so you don't go there. But there might be things that you're wrestling with. So for me, sometimes I have avoided a situation because I'm afraid to set up a boundary. And so for me, I think that avoiding is really helpful when I really just need to set up the boundary, and I need to really figure out, like, why is it that I'm wrestling with whatever the situation is or wherever the person is. And so I think it's good to know for yourself, like, why am I deciding that this doesn't feel good or right for me? Or why am I deciding that it does feel good or right for me? And again, that's not about justifying your feelings. That's not about having to overly explain to anyone or even to yourself why it doesn't feel good. But it is another way or another opportunity to explore, is there a deeper rooted issue when it comes to the particular boundary that you're trying to set. What else was I gonna say? Yeah, that was my last little note. It's like, why am I saying yes or why am I saying no? The other thing that is a tip that someone gave me is, sometimes we don't set boundaries because we have an idea of how other people will respond, even if that might not be our reality. So for people who maybe, struggle with anxiety, I know that I have struggled with anxiety for sure, is I can sometimes in my head make a story about how something is going to play out before it plays out. And the story that I tell myself in my head now becomes what I perceive as reality, even if it hasn't happened yet. And so how often are you, like, negatively trying to mind read or predict what is going to happen without any actual factual evidence of the case that might happen? How many times are you predicting that your boss is going to yell at you, or that your spouse is going to be mad at you, or that your family is going to disown you if you tell them you can't come to this event or you can't participate in X, Y, and Z? And, one of the things that my old therapist told me, which, I'll refer back to Dr. Kelso a lot because she was the jam, was that a lot of times we will focus on the 10 to 15% of what could go wrong. Like the worst case scenario literally might have a 15% probability, but we're focused on it 90% of the time, which means we didn't leave any other room for what the options would be in terms of if we say yes or no to something. And so in my head, if I say no to my boss, or if I tell a friend that I was hurt by something that they did and that I need some space, I've already jumped to, they're going to yell at me. They don't want anything to do with me. They'll never talk to me again. And I won't see this person for the next 5 to 6 years. That may happen. Like that could be a 10%, 20% chance that could happen. But there's also 70%, 30%, like there are other percentages of what might happen. And so it could be that what you are projecting might not be close to reality at all, or there's somewhere in between of the best case scenario and your worst case scenario. And so when it comes to telling people your boundaries or even setting your boundaries, how can you be more balanced in your mentality instead of going straight to the worst case scenario? Is there somewhere in between that is more rooted in reality and more rooted in what you've seen happen before that can maybe give you a better idea of how that situation will play out? I know for me, every time that I've had a conversation, or almost every time that I've talked to somebody about needing space, about needing time away, or about not being able to participate in something. Like every time I've set a boundary with someone, they've adhered to it for the most part, or they've been like, oh, I understand. Like they're not pissed off. They're not, disowning me. They're not thinking that my work performance is terrible. They literally just move on to the next thing. And if I be honest, for the times where people have not respected the boundary or they have been upset with me, it usually is someone who, when I think about long term, I didn't want them in my life like that anyway. Like when I think about the dude who maybe didn't respect that, you're not coming over to my house, or, the person who wants me to pick up the phone every day, those people, for the most part, have ended up being seasonal anyway. And when I think about it long term, I'm much happier that they're not in my space. And so for me, looking at patterns of what have happened when I've successfully communicated and asked for a boundary helps give me confidence in the future to continue to set boundaries. But how many times are we negatively predicting something will happen and not thinking about what could actually happen? And how many times are we sweating over setting boundaries for people who we didn't want to engage with like that in the first place? Worrying about somebody's feelings that at the end of the day doesn't add enough value or energy to your life can also just be a waste of your time. So, keeping those people in sort of the particular box that they hold in your life helps you set better boundaries with them and helps you kind of understand like how you want to move and how you want to flow with them from the get-go. So for me, that's just been helpful to learn and to hold on to. The next thing that has been a helpful tip, I wish I would have put numbers by this, but oh well, we're at 33 minutes. Next time there'll be numbers when it comes to tips. But one of the things that has been helpful to me with the current therapist I have is about testing out boundaries. So again, they don't have to be super hard and fixed as you're kind of trying to discover what works for you. So there are some people in my life who at this point may never be the person who can fully actively listen, and I can love them and I can care about them, but I might not always go to them around a particular subject because I know they're just maybe not an active listener in that area. Or, you might have a friend or a relative who you know, at this point in your life, they might constantly be pretty negative. So you can still engage with them, but maybe you don't engage with them around a specific topic. One of the things is, what are the low hanging fruits? What are the things that you can try out and test with people in your life when you're trying to establish boundaries? What are the things that work that you can try out that don't feel as huge or as dramatic as this other boundary that you're trying to start out? So if it feels really difficult for you to take a vacation week off, can you start with once a week you will end work a half an hour earlier than you normally do? Can it be that if it's hard for you to tell that friend that they talk too much, could it be that you just cut your phone off a half an hour earlier before you go to bed? I put my phone on do not disturb between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. So unless you're on my favorites list, you will not get through, or if there's an emergency. Like, outside of that, I'm trying not to really talk to people before those times of day. Like, that's my time. And so are there things that you can practice and kind of see, okay, this person respects this boundary. Oh, they don't. And then it kind of tells you where you need to pull back or where you need to insert yourself more. And so play around with it is kind of like that's a suggestion that I would give. I know that boundaries seem like this really super heavy topic, but relationships are complex and they're ever changing. And so when it comes to family, maybe it's not this black and white of, I'm going to cut 75% of y'all off starting the end of 2020. And maybe it is you go by relationship and you go by situation. So maybe it is family gatherings feel really good for you, but going to that particular church environment does not. Maybe it is that, when you're in town, spending, 2 or 3 days at your mom's house feels really good. But you know that once you get to a week, there are just certain people that are going to come over, or certain patterns about your parent that you won't be able to really tolerate. Like, test it out and see what feels good for you. And that might change from 1 year, 1 week, 1 day to the next. But there are things that you can kind of play around with. So instead of, like they say, throw the baby out with the bathwater, instead of just completely cutting people off or trying to go to this extreme of, I'm never going to work on Fridays, maybe you start slow and you see how you feel about it, and you see how other people react. Because based off of other people's reactions, it can also help you figure out, okay, maybe I need to establish more boundaries with that person. Or maybe this person, because they can't respect the boundaries that I have set up, maybe there's someone who I need to keep at a particular kind of distance. Or, man, I didn't realize that if I actually told my friend or I actually told my partner that I need help in this area, or that this thing drains me, I'm surprised at how receptive they are. I'm surprised at how open they were to my feedback. So maybe I can let them in a little bit more. It doesn't always mean that when you test it out, it's a sign to figure out how you can keep sort of like closing some things off. It might be actually a sign that gives you information around how you can let people in. Relationships in life are all data points. They're all pieces of data that give us more information about how we want to move and how we want to flow, kind of like if we were a computer. And so look at relationships and look at setting boundaries as if you're doing different codes. And maybe this code works for this person and this code doesn't work for that person. And that's okay. But it's okay to test it out. It's okay to feel it out. You don't have to go from 0 to 100. But just starting with honoring yourself and what feels good for you and honoring where you are at that point in time will truly make a world of difference. And so I think that's all that I've got, or at least that's all that's kind of coming up in my brain and in my spirit to talk about boundaries. I will see if there are some resources that I can maybe put below in the group. And if folks want to continue the conversation tomorrow when we check in, I think we can do that. I'm leaning towards doing Facebook rooms. I don't imagine that there'll be all 19 of us that will be available for this check-in tomorrow. And so I think Facebook rooms can maybe go up to like 8 people. And so I know last time we had maybe 7 of us or so that did the check-in. So I might do Facebook Live tomorrow and do the Facebook room for us to do our check-in. So just like stay tuned, because I'm trying to play this by ear, because this is all like new for me. So that's what I think I would try. I'm also leaning towards maybe a 6 or a 6:30 p.m. start time, so that we're not wrapping up at 8 p.m. So I'm thinking maybe leaning towards like a 6 p.m. for our check-in tomorrow. So then by the time we get to 7:30, people can kind of head out and go back to like the rest of their days. So I just want to put that out there. If you have suggestions, just text me. Like any kind of feedback is helpful, because I know what my schedule looks like, but I also want to be respectful of other people's schedule and engage with as many people as possible. So tomorrow, thinking at 6 p.m. on Facebook, we will have a check-in. I think I'll make like a virtual room, which I guess is like Facebook Zoom. I'll try to do that tomorrow. And then if we happen to have, more than 7 or 8 people, then I'll maybe just send out a Zoom link and then we can move it to Zoom. But I think we're going to try for like a 6:15 maybe start time tomorrow, and stay for maybe an hour and 20 minutes, and just do a general check-in around how you're doing, and then also if people want to continue the conversation around boundaries. But please, I would urge all of you to, there are a lot of folks who said that boundaries is a thing that they're thinking about right now, to take some time to write, to reflect, or to have a conversation with somebody that you sort of trust their insight on about a particular area of life where you would like to establish more boundaries. Why do you want to establish those boundaries? And then what is something that is a small win that you can start out with small, and which language you can use that feels comfortable for you as you start to communicate or reiterate boundaries that you're setting up. So I hope these tips were helpful for you all. I hope that you all are having a good start to the week. And even if the week has been wild, like my past 3 weeks at work have been, I hope that you're taking some time when you're in your home space, or some kind of dedicated time of the day, to just kind of get your mind together, and just be centered with yourself. So I appreciate you all. Thanks for participating in the group again. And I look forward to seeing some of your faces tomorrow. Bye.